27th of Tevet, Samech Vav, page Samech.
Right, so we sort of we were in the middle of the view that Rusa Daliba is Tevet the Atmas Elakus is Nitfas Rusa Daliba, but Atmas is not Nitfas Halidei Machshava, אפילו למחשבה הכי עליונות. דווקא through the lave and the unit from Rusa Daliba. So we began with a beer how there can be an avis echad lechavero, avis ha'oyev el ha'ohuv. And that can also be with a strong and with a powerful ava, and it can bring also to a iskashrus between them. And we saw that iskashrus was what we call in Yiddish an avekleig. In other words, that a person devotes himself, gives himself away to the other person. Mitzad the goydel, the greatness of the iskashrus and the power of the emotion in the iskashrus. But we saw that there's some sort of a reason and tamim for that iskashrus, and it can be whether the guy is a great benefactor towards him, he does him chesed kol hazman, or mitzad is a great milah that the person that he loves may have, and therefore he's a ish ma'ula, he's an elevated person b'klal, and therefore he's devoted to him and he's makasher himself to that person. That has to come from some form of seichel v'izboninus. That's based on an appreciation, al-pi, reasoning, and seichel, how this guy is in effect a ish ha'toiv, he's bemet a ish ha'chesed, and he's meitiv chasdei with him, or his seichel is able to understand and to grasp the greatness and the elevation of that person in his etzem being. And when he's able to understand those inyonim, and he appreciates them and he deepens his mind in them, then he becomes makusha and devoted to that person. We saw in Yiddish, wird zu ihm übergegeben. He becomes devoted and given over. The word übergegeben means to give oneself over to something. That he dafke understands the elevation. And the word ilah is like an inclusive word, meaning all the things that we saw. Either he's a Baal Chesed, and because of that he appreciates and he feels devoted to him, he appreciates all that he does for him, or mitzad the great milas that the other person has. But all those inyonim are dafke when he understands and is misboinen and puts his mind, as you might say, to understanding and appreciating the details of those inyonim. Ma'ashein kain, what that's about the middle of the Omet Samuch. Ma'ashein kain biladei zois lo yeh makusha umoso eilav. Without that, without the understanding, without having put his mind to appreciate those great advantages and milas that there are in the other person, then he won't be makusha and he won't be devoted to him. And so what does that imply? If the whole devotion, which can even come to a point of ibegeben, what that means, devoting himself to the other person, how does that, I mean, why would we say that that's only like a dover chitzini, or that's what we're implying? And it only comes mitzad the inyan of understanding and seichel, is the result of that is, and therefore the what you might call the mahus of that ahava and that devotion is only to the revealed aspects of the loved person, but not to his very essence. Even though you might find that when it comes to the union of chesed, and he devotes himself to the guy because he sees the great chesed he's done for him, and he's given him kindness and thoughtfulness in all of his inyanim. So you might say, well, that's not really an understanding of anything to do with the guy's mahus. It's not really got to do with his pnimiyas. It's only what he does, good things for people. In that regard, you might say, you can understand why it's limited only to his revelations, as you might say, the outer aspect of that person. But if he's devoted to the maila what this person has, and he's mispainin in the ilui, then ilui in a person, meaning his great elevation as an individual, that comes mitalizeta. He's only got milas in the sense that he's higher and more elevated, and what you might call a more what's the expression, uplifted person, because that's what he's like be'emes, and that's what he's like be'etzem. So it would seem that in the second aspect that we're talking about, it needs a view. Why do we say that that's only in the giluim of that person, but not in his? It's not magia el atzmusay. So we have to say that enoch hanami, all things that a person does, afilu b'chitzonius, they are what you might call lafi erech, his godless that he has in himself. So the chesed and the kindness that a great person does to other people is a different quality and a different form of chesed than what a more simple person would do. And why? Because since he's a great person, then all of his giluim are also great. That's a dover that we can understand. And therefore, somebody who's great be'etzem atzmusay, and therefore even the giluim are higher than, and they got more quality and more pnimis in them than what other people would do in the same giluim, or what they would reveal in the same giluim. So there's a sicher that if he's a very elevated person, then the things which we're describing here as only being giluim and not his atzmas are lefi erech atzmas. And so that's a big cloud, that everything a person does is lefi erech his etzem. It's got a certain relationship to his etzem. And therefore we see that all sorts of small things can reveal a person's etzem. It can give some understanding of what this person's like. Be'emes, is he a great person or an elevated person or a simple person or how do you call it, an idle person or chashem, a grob person, v'chule v'chule. That these inyonim reveal themselves in the simple inyonim because of their relationship to the etzem. So that's emes. However, the point being made here in the Maimah is, and that's a klal gadol, that everything that's revealed in a person is to a certain extent lefi oifen his etzem. And therefore the Gemara says in the sector of Eidah, what the Gemara brings, that afilu siches chulin shel talmidei chachamim tzrichim limud, that even the ordinary things that a Talmud Chacham says, sichas chulin, things that he says in reference to ordinary everyday things, which don't necessarily involve him giving a biur and some meaning in learning, or him stating something to do with learning, but he just mentioned a necessity of gashmias, or how do you call it, a physical necessity, and that's called sichas chulin. But if it's said by a Talmud Chacham, then you have to learn it. That's up to Gemara, that you can learn something from that. And so the Gemara brings on that a pasuk. It brings a pasuk right at the beginning of the Tilim, where it's written that a person, that he's a ishamayla, then a philo, that a good tree, how do you call it, a well-based tree, then a philo alehu lo yiboil, even its, how do you call it, its leaf won't how do you call it, drift, or what's the expression? It won't go sort of dry and droopy so quickly, since it comes from a very powerful and strong tree. I said, ever the Gemara says that afilu alehu lo yibuel, by a Talmud Chacham, even what looks to be just like the leaves, off his branches, it seems to be outward talk, you have to pay careful attention, because you can learn something from that. Everything he says is a form of a chayra, there's something hidden in it, because of his greatness. Of it nonetheless, the Gemara says it's still a sichas chulim. It's a sichas chulim. It's not a Indian in learning. But nonetheless, you have to observe and learn things from it. So that's what the Rebbe means here. That somebody who's great, and anything that he does expresses and is lefi erech of his greatness. And therefore, if he just does a simple thing, it's nikah, or if he just says a few words, it's recognizable that that's from a Adam Godel. But you guys are familiar with that's a famous story, but then there's a story that's not so famous. You guys are familiar with the story about the Mezritch Magi. That he looked at a kli on the table. There was once a kli. It was a model made by somebody. Somebody made a ship or something, a model, a very beautiful model. So the Mezritch Magi looked at it and he said that guy's blind in one eye. The guy who made it is blind in one eye. So they happened to find out, and they found out he was blind in one eye. So they asked how the Mezritch Magi know that. So that anything that a person does, then his whole being, to a certain extent, is expressed by it. That's lefi erech. So the Maggid was such an unbelievable maven in people that he could tell even what the guy was like physically from what he saw in what he did. What I can assume from the very indifferent way that was received is that everybody knew the story already, so it was a little tiresome for them to hear it again. But anyway, whatever. That happens to be the case. And then even more than that, there was another story. I'll just have to tell it Bekitzer because it might get too much barichas. Very Bekitzer, there once came a peddler into Lubavitch, a Jewish peddler, and he claimed that he had kelim and vessels that they belonged to great people, the Jewish people in the past. He said this belonged to the Marshoah, and this belonged to to the Maharam, or something. This belonged to to this great Rav in the past. This belonged to this one, and he was trying to make some Yiddish geld. He was trying to make some money on the deal. So he went into the Rebbe Rashab and he put all the things on the table. He said, "Oh, this is from the Maram Shif, and this is from the Marshoah, and this is from them, and this is from the Chasam Chayzid, and the Rebbe Kiva Eiger, Chayzid, different things." So the Rebbe Rashab just looked at them and he picked up each one and held it in his hand for a second. And all of a sudden there was and he put it down. Each one he picked up and he put down. And then there was a little Havdalah, they call pushka, they call Shamamonim pushka, what do you call it? A pushka for smacking the Shamamonim on Shabbat. So it's called Havdalah pushka. So the Rebbe Rashab picked that up and then he held it in his hand. And he said he doesn't know who that's from, but it's from Odom God. It belonged to a great man. So he asked the guy how much he wanted for it. And the guy said, well, this. He said this. So he made quite a generous statement. The Rebbe Rashab paid him.
The other Kalim were actually from the people?
No, apparently not, because the Rebbe just picked them up and put them down. Well, that one he picked up and he said, yeah, that was from Odom Godel. And how much did the guy, the Rebbe said he doesn't know who it is. He said it was from the Marshoah, Chayzis and women. So he said he's not necessarily, he doesn't believe that 100%, but it was certainly from a great man. It's a matter if he's prepared to sell, he'll buy it. So you guys don't know, but there's a hemshech to the story. The story's got a hemshech, but we'll just have to continue for the time being because we can't deal with all the hemshechim. With all the stories, we'd never get anywhere. But anyway, what do we see from that? We see that a great person, even a keli that he uses, which is separate Indian from him altogether, and it's just made out of silver or something, it gains from being. It gains a certain influence. So we see that every Indian, by a Talmud Chacham or by a Ish Mu'udeh, then his inyonim, even those things which are just kelim, they benefit from him, and they in some way express his greatness. Edify, that's what the Rebbe says here. That whatever sort of hashpah he gives is also very elevated. So somebody who's able to appreciate that, he becomes very devoted to the person. So why does the Rebbe say it's only a gilui? So the answer is that's only lefi erech, his greatness. Oh, but that doesn't tell me, he's emes of greatness. It just tells me that he is a great person, because I can see from the giluim that he does that he's great. Oh, but what is be'etzim his greatness? We don't really know. We can't really be masik the etzim pnimius of his neshama and of all of his inyonim. Pnimim v'achmiyim l'mayla mihagiluim. We can't appreciate them alidei the giluim, because the giluim are only ha'oras from a etzim. They're not the etzim mami. Even though ha'oras, we pointed out, from a etzim also carries in itself the gilui lefi erech or etzim. So therefore the Rebbe says that no matter how great is the appreciation the person has in the greatness of the second individual, and he's devoted to him because of that, he's only really grasping the revelation to that person of a not mamish his etzem. And therefore he says the Ahava is kashrus magia rak ba'gilui shel ha'ohu v'lo bi'atzmusei mamish, but not in his very essence. This is a reason for the Ahava. It's like a causatory relationship. That because he's got these milas, and he understood those milas, and the takalafiyarak the gadlus, and therefore he appreciates, and they are like a cause to him having this devotion. Since it's like a cause in the middle, then it's not ayinyan for two essences being drawn one to the other. There's like a go-between series of factors which are called understanding and appreciation. So therefore he said that inyan is a sibur to the Ahava, and that comes because he's got good midas, or because of the greatness of his seichel, or he's got some other greatness about him that's even more than his seichel. I'm sorry, where are we? Harei mamela ais kashrus hu gamkein rak bezois lavor loy ba'atzm shloi mamish. Therefore, the kashrus to this person is only mitzad that joining factor, what you call the sibba, the cause. That's his love is through the cause. It goes and it relates to the person through the cause of. It's not a binding up to the very essence of that person. It's only like a link with a great cause that comes out of him. But it's not a link into his mamish, into his atzm. Sure, if I'm it's a very when you think about it, it's a very correct analysis of what you might call genuine connection and genuine admiration between human beings. A love that a father has for a son, ain't no mitzad ha'toiv shaboy, oi mitzad ha'ilui, v'loi mitzad ha'ashpor shemashpir loi. Ki im mitzad shehu etzem echad imoi. So he said the Ahava that a father has to a son is not because of some sort of goodness that's in the son. The son's a very good person. So he said, my son's a really kivaldik person, and therefore I really, devoted to him. I really love him because of that. Or not because he's a very elevated person. He said, I really love my son because he's elevated, this is great. And also, it's not harei. He said, mamela. I'm sorry, where are we? Eno mitzad tov shabai, oi mitzad ha'ilui, v'loi mitzad ha'ashpah. sometimes the son does a lot of good things for his father, and he looks after him and so on and so forth. He's mashpia to his father, a lot of inyonim. But he said the Av is not because of that either. Ki'im, it's purely due to the fact that they are one essence. Ulazois ain't chorik al zeh shum is born in it. Sharei ain't shum tam v'sibur ela ava. Vayis kashus. She'it starik li's boinem bode. Ushal yedei zeh tiyer ha'ava. So the Rebbe says, we're two atoms, the two very essences of two entities are joined together, then they don't need what we call before a siba. They don't need a causatory factor that links them together, and the whole link is through that causatory factor. But he said, since they're one and the same essence, then they're just drawn to one another mitzad the essence, and they don't need to be misbeinen in that. They don't need to reflect on it. It doesn't need to have any reasons. And on the contrary, we see it, that's what he's about to mention, that there can even be a distance between them, and yet nonetheless, the Ava was saying, and if it's a genuine distance, then it can even increase the Ava. And we'll see that Ava doesn't need any promotion. Only it could be that it's had certain factors in this world, it might be like as it were forgotten. It might sort of drop into a lack of expression. But as soon as either party remembers it, they just remember that that's his father, or he remembers that that's his son, then immediately the Ava is there, back again. So for that we see that it's not a dover talui be'ezishu, it's not dependent on ezishu goyrem, no, that is one essence linking to the other.
Does it require the knowledge of the fact that they're one?
Not necessarily. Well, I mean, I suppose it needs some basic, tip-off that that's his father. But I mean, there have been stories, and there are occurrences in human affairs where people realize that they were father and son without necessarily being told about it, or they sensed it, or they felt it, or they were aware of it, and then they found out, or all sorts of. I mean, there's all sorts of stories. Well, I don't happen to know any particular one, but there are a lot of such stories. So, I mean, from that we see that you don't need necessarily to know all the details. But I suppose you need some basic, link of knowledge in the matter. But that's not so much the issue. So we're talking about he knows it's his father, he knows it's his son. What we're discussing is that the connection between them and the love and the devotion and the readiness, to be devoted and to give everything one for the other is not dependent in any factor. There's not like anything which links them. And therefore we see that even if the son is not what the father would want him to be, and he may be on the contrary, he may be very much not what he wants him to be, not what he hoped of him, and who knows all the various expressions as they are, etc., etc. Nonetheless, he can still feel this love for the son, and he can still be devoted to him, even though the son is not at all what he might have wanted him to be or imagined he would be.
Isn't this love? Isn't this love more? Doesn't the father love his son more than the son loves his father?
It's not apparent that way in Siddhis. No. I mean, there might be a nuance of that sort here or there, but it's very hard to argue that way in Siddhis, because the whole point is that they're the same etzer.
Right.
So if you look carefully in Perek Beis in Tanya, and I was about to bring that down anyway, but since you brought up the point, if you look carefully in Perek Beis in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe deals with the whole Indian of B'nai B'choyer Yisrael, right from the beginning of the Perek, and then later on he brings this long and wondrous moshel, tremendously detailed moshel, of how even the lowest aspects of the son really stem from the moyach of the father, and so on and so forth. Right, yeah. So then there's a whole little sentence over there in the Lashon Kodesh in Tanya, where it would appear that the Alter Rebbe is saying a greater chiddush, that even after the son is born, and even when he's walking around on his own, nonetheless his moyach and the father's moyach are still connected be'etem, that they have this sort of etzem mishkashus zeh lezeh. And that's a chiddush, because most people don't learn that way. But if you look carefully in Tanya, it would seem that that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. So I mean, if we learn that way, then it's not really dependent in the father or the son, that they're both just the same etzem, and they're always mekushorim zeh b'zeh mitzad zeh. You follow? So that's the type of inyan we're trying to get over, and therefore the Rebbe stresses that in this case it's not mitzad eze sibur. You follow? It's not mitzad eze link point, some sort of causation. But one thing which is etzem, of course, and it's an old the expression in Chabad Chassidus that etzem is drawn to etzem. One essence moves to its own essence.
Right.
So therefore, what the point being is that a father and a son are one essence. And like I said, it's not just that there's like a continuation of a deep connection, after the son is born, but it would appear that the two brains are mamish bound together. I say it would appear if you look carefully in Tanya Perek Beis, and that's what appears. However, even though some people don't necessarily agree with that pshat, it seems to me that that's the biur hadora. Anyway, he says that the av is kashrus yitztarik lisboinen. Therefore, you don't need to reflect in this. It's just there. It's your very essential being is linked to this other being, and you're just aware of him in a way that you're devoted to him without the necessity to reflect about it at all. Amamela said that a bit follows that these kashrus he bi'atzmus mamish loy bi'hagiluim lavad mi'acha she'ein hagilui sibas ha'ava keim ha'atzmus davkeh. So here, like a summing up, that Rebbe said, therefore, the connection and the binding up is from one to the other in their atzmusas. In other words, the atzmus of the son is bound to the atzmus of the Ov, and not in any revelations from them. Since, we don't need any revelation to link them here. They don't need any revelation whatsoever, just the fact that they have the two etzems being one and the same. Therefore they're linked mitzad ha'atzmus davke. Ve'ha'avo v'aish kashrus hazois hi betmidus ba'aben rak lefiyomim hi behelem v'tzrichim lo'oira mi'ahelem elagim. So the Rebbe said that therefore this is how they call it tamidius. It's how do you call it? Constant. It's always there. It's always there. Just that sometimes, you might need to arouse it mi'ahelem ela gilui, from the hiding into the revelation. But we're going to see that hiding is not really a emes of hiding. It's only just that what you might call certain temporary, almost in inverted commas, minor factors can cause the ava to be a little bit covered over. But we don't mean here by helem amiti, that just loses its state. We just mean that certain things can, what you might call, block off the intensity. A form of spiritual dust can sort of settle on the area, but if you just blow the dust away, then you've got the essence just like it was before. And therefore, all sorts of little temporal things like day-to-day busyness, or who knows what, can cause the ava to cool down for a moment, but at any point it can just come back to its full intensity because it's really there. It's not that you have to recreate the ava, it's just there. All you have to do is just arouse it, as you might say. And the arousal meaning you just bring it back to the desired intensity. But it's there, belav hochi, and that's what he means. It's an infant intermediate.
Is there a reason why the Rebbe says dafka with Ben?
Why does he use the infant Ben rather than? No, I don't think so. I see what you mean, but the mashmoyas is that it's both ways. But what we could suggest is that usually life makes it that for a large part of life the son goes around and does what he does, and the father is more stationary. So if he says that a certain covering over through busyness and through tireless of the world, then that's more likely to happen in the younger one than in the more mature one. So therefore he says the Ben feels that way like the father. Oh, but the truth is, it's the same type of Ava from the son from the father to the son. And on the contrary, the intermediates in the father is maybe more noticeable. And that's why he uses this motto, mitzad the Ben.
How do you say dust free?
Dust free?
Yeah.
I don't know. Dust free? Below avak. without dust.
I mean, on top of the love, you said, sometimes dust gets on top of it, you just have to...
how do you make it dust free?
Yeah, I mean, how do you make it so you don't get dust on it?
Oh, well, we'll see about that in a second. We'll come to that in a second. So he said, Mamela Iskashus, he ba'atzmas mamish lo ba'agiloim. In other words, to medias, that sometimes he behelim. So how do you do that? That's exactly your question. How's he going to erase it? How's he going to literally shake off that covering? He said, "V'hainu kasher meishim al libo shehu avi, b'zeh miseirer ha'ava." It's all as simple as that. All he's got to do is just remind himself that that's his father. That's all. In other words, that you'll notice in several places in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe refers to the Ava Mesuteres, but that's the same meaning. That's the Ava we're going to see in a minute. This exists between the Shomas as well. And the Eivta, over there the Alter Rebbe used the expression Shocheach es Ahavose HaMesuteres V'Hativius L'Hashem. He forgets. So I mean, you can't forget something that you never had. I mean, something that you don't have, you can't forget it. And so the pshat is that the Av is below there. You can just forget it. But forgetting doesn't affect anything. The fact that it could be, I might forget my wallet or something. I hope I don't do that, but I might forget my wallet in my office. Is it still there? The wallet is there, and nothing's happened by the fact that I forgot it. It's still there. And I'm still interested in returning it to my pocket with exactly the same, with exactly the same, power and tekifas, because a thing which is belavochi there and it's belavochi mine, it's anyway there and it's anyway mine. It doesn't really need anything to recreate that connection. You just need to remember where you left it. In other words, that's what he says. You just need to place your mind on the fact that he's your father. And it could even be that somebody just has to say to you. Somebody just to walk in and say, listen here, think about your father for a moment, or remind yourself about your father. Have you thought of your father recently? Oh, some boing. My father killed out. That starts off the whole thing. That's what he says. Meishim libe el libo. You just have to place into your mind or your heart, as it were, that he's your father, and then the whole thing is there. Ya bozeh misoyer oile fiyomim, said the Rebbe, misoyer alitei richuk. Sometimes it can happen through distance. In other words, nothing's really happened to cause the hour to become covered over by all sorts of minor factors. But they just happen to be distant one from the other. In other words, they're not close, begashmias or in b'mokim, one to the other. Now, it could possibly be that there's a certain implication here. If we study the words carefully, it could be there's an implication here as well, that there can sometimes be a richuk, a distance, mitzad ruchnias. In other words, that there's been a quarrel, or they disagreed, or maybe he said, I really am angry with his son, I don't want to hear about him right now. There are all sorts of possibilities of that nature which can occur. And therefore that's called richuk, either begashmius or inyanim ruchnim, there can be a richuk. So the Rebbe says, the avo can itself awaken purely through the richuk. Kasher heim ruchochim zemizeh, misoyer ali deizeh ha'ava. That from that itself can awaken the avo. In other words, here's a fascinating thing, that where two things are the same etzem, the fact that they drift apart, or that itself can wake up the other. In other words, the very fact that they're distant from one to the other, or that itself, if either one of them realize that itself can touch off the whole power and the whole richness of the Ava without any other hisbon in it. Just the fact that I'm not close to my father. I'm not there with him, or either Baruchnius there or Begashmius. That itself is enough to touch off the whole Ahava. And therefore, this is an interesting thing, that in a way this is even less quantitative than Meisi Mel Liboy. When you're Meisi Mel Liboy, at least you're doing something. You're remembering, oh, this is my father, oh, yours. I'm remembering, I'm taking account of it, and do it. Over here, it would appear from the language of the Rebbe here, just the very fact that they're distant, that itself can create a sudden arousal of the Av. The Etzem Richuk itself. And it's something, Bedugma, we find the famous story with the famous Moshel, but the Baal Shem Tov said, when they get to the Ina of Rosh Hashanah, the blowing of Sheva, on Rosh Hashanah, what you're all familiar with, the lengthy Moshel with the Baal Shem Tov brought, so it's probably somewhat superfluous to go into all the details. Aren't you?
No. Just need a little refresher.
Yeah, just refresh it a little bit.
Refresher.
So there's a famous Muslim with the Baal Shem Tov said that a king that he sent his son out on a task, to go around amongst the different states in his empire and check out what's going on and do certain tasks for him. So the son Tucker went out to these different places, and then he met up with this guy, and he met up with another one, and then they decided to have a card game, to have a good time. They decided this, and they decided something else, and little by little he got caught up with all these courtiers and with all these different other, knobs and how do you call them, aristocracy, with all the important hangers-on, and all the sort of inyanim. And so he got involved with these guys, and he started having a good time, started going to ballrooms and all sorts of marzalach. So little by little he began to forget that he was on a shlichus from his father. He began to forget that his whole business, what was he doing here? Because he was on a shlichus from St. Tat. He began to take more attention to the good inyanim which were being offered him here. What a great time he was having, etc., etc. So he became so involved, he got so mixed up with all sorts of other side knobs, that they weren't really people that reminded him, a great deal about the Melech. But they, they were into what do they call it, into money and position, all this sort of business. So he got all swept up, and gradually he began to forget that he was the son of the king. He began to gradually forget, that he's the Ben HaMelech. He knew there was something important about him when people were looking for his favors and all that, but he began to forget that he was a Ben HaMelech. Then he went to another Yerida, that he forgot both things. He forgot both that he was on a shlichus and that he was the Ben HaMelech. And he was happy just to be, how do you call it, a bit of a reprobate, what's the expression?
Schlepper?
Huh?
Schlepper?
Yeah, a schlepper. Yeah, I had to quote one of these people today. I forgot my English. Gradually beginning to fail me at certain points.
Vanguard.
Huh?
Vanguard.
Vanguard?
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. He began to be one of these people that just sort of knock around, have a good time, and this and this. And then he fell even deeper, and he became even more, he started getting all sorts of not desirable things, and a hin and a her, until, even if you looked at him, he didn't look all that much different than the whole surroundings. He even lost the outer signs of being a Ben Miller. People just didn't notice that this was a Ben Miller. And then all of a sudden one day he's sitting, someplace, and it's way out of the different countries where the king had sent him to look and to carry out the shlichus with the whole inyan, and all of a sudden, boom, it sort of flies into his head that Rabbeinu Shalom, he's the son of the king. What on earth is he doing? He's the son of the king. All of a sudden, he remembered. Now, why would you say he remembered? Because he never lost that. It's still there, that he's the son of the king. That's an absolute timeless Matziyah. And it's an unchangeable Matziyah. That he's the son of the king. So all of a sudden, so he decided he's going to make his way back to his his father, waar is the ganze Mosul? It's gate. But in the meantime, he'd been so involved in all these different countries, he'd forgotten the language, he'd even forgotten the original language that he used to speak. The language that the king spoke, he forgot it. And I do it. And he rushes and he goes to all these different states and different countries and eventually comes back to the city of his father, the city of the king with the old stink. And he asks where's the palace, and he gets close to the palace. And he begins to weep, and he realizes that this is his home, this is where he came from, and this is him, this is his etu. But all the guards and the helicopters, the gendarmes or whatever you call them, who are around the palace, they won't let him in. You're just a nobody. Who are you? Could be a spy, whoever. Who you are? No way. You understand? And he got terrible bizyanas. They clapped him with their rifle butts and they threw him and they hoisted and what. And he ended up, thrown on the ashpot. And he couldn't talk the language anymore to explain to them they got a mistake, with that. Or he just said, so this is what's up, threw him into the moat or something, and that was it. So in the end, what does he do? He just stands and he looks at the palace, and all of a sudden his father, the king, decides to take a spazier, on the battlements, the huge big parts of the castle and so on. His father decides to go on a spazier, how do you call it?
Stroll.
A stroll, an afternoon stroll. It's called in Yiddish a spazier. And all of a sudden, he's down in the moat somewhere, and he decides that the only thing he can do is call out to his father. He just calls out Abba, he calls out the word Abba, hoping that maybe somewhere or another it will be heard. So he begins to shray Abba. And all of a sudden the king is walking along the battlement. All of a sudden the king hears this word, So the king goes out of his kelim, and he's going out of his kelim. And then one way or another, they meet up, you understand? The king calls him in and they reunite. So that's Indian for Shoifa. The whole year you forget everything, you forget where you're going, and then all of a sudden on Rosh Hashanah Yishrei Ava, and the Eivishter, he's not spaziering on battlements, but the Eivishter is looking out over all the Eilumas. All of a sudden, boom, the Eivishter here. The Eivishter is also very, very touched by the fact that you called him Abba, even though we can't really understand how the Eivishter started, but that's another title. But that's how it is. That's the Indian what we mean here. What we mean here is that this doesn't need, and sometimes the very fact that they're distant, that's what touches off the Abba. He didn't have anything with his father, he didn't know anything, he's not told anything by anybody, nothing, just all of a sudden he fell so far and he was so distant, but that gufa all of a sudden that put into his, somehow or another, arose within him the etzem that he belongs to the king, and he's the same etzem with the king. So that's what we see, that sometimes distance has this amazing ability to, and like we said, this distance can be either in place or it can be in ruchnis. But by this particular mashal, it's both. First of all, he went a long way away, and Tzveiten says he lost all the ordinary revealed connections except for the word Abba. That's what we have to suggest. Now here we're going to see that this gets very close. The reason I brought that whole mashal, that we're going to see now, it gets very close to that mashal. The Rebbe says that Ali Dei the Richuk, that their distance, Miseiru, Ali Dei Zeh Ha'ava. Aber ein Chorik Lezeh is born in his protiyas. He doesn't have to go into all sorts of detailed reflections. Lafisha Ha'ava hi mitzada atzmi mamish. The Ha'ava is mitzad the very essence. Therefore he doesn't need a big long his bonus. Lochein anu roim asher davko haben. Yesh boi hayechoilas, and here we see that we're definitely going from the ben again towards the father. But once again, because this is more likely to be the Matthias. It's more likely to be the Matthias. This is the way life functions. Lochein, he says, Anu roim asher davki haben yesh boi hayechoilas, the ability la'oira es atzmas ha'av, to wake up the essence of the Father, Masha Ainzi Pchelis Adam Acher Lo'era Koka, what is not within the capacity of another man to awake so much. I mean, he can also awake. I mean, if you call to another person for mercy, it touches you very deeply. But he said, when the son calls to his father, then he touches him much deeper. Ukemoi kasher haben soek abba. Now you got it. You see, this is mamish appropriate. That's why I went out of my way to tell the whole moshel. That when the ben calls out abba, then nizos ha'av b'chol etzem husay mamish. The father gets shockled. Nizos. Nizos means he gets moved out of his place.
Shaken.
Yeah, how do you call it? He becomes vertreselt in Yiddish as an expression. He becomes vertreselt b'chol etzem husay mamish. In other words, he just hears that call. That's the motion of the story. Yeah, he just heard the word Abba, and it just completely affected him in his very essence. What he won't be nizuz in that way, boifen kozeh, from the shouting of another person, because another person is not going to call him Abba. So, I mean, he'll hear another person call to him for anything, it'll make him move, and it'll move him, but not that way. It won't move in the way the call of his son does. I'm sorry. From another person who is not his son. He is affected by it, and he's vertreselt. He is vertreselt. Mikol mokim eino nizes b'chol atzmusei mamish kemoi mitzayches ha-ben. He's not moved in the very essence of his being like he is from the shouting of the son. Why is that? Lefi shetzayches ha-benu mi'etzem atzmusei mamish v'hari hu nogeya rilt on. Nogea means real ton means that he touches inwards. Be atzmusav. In other words, when the Av hears that expression, Abba being called to him, it touches to him the very what you might call the root of his soul, the root of his being, touches into his very essence, and it causes him and that's the word real ton. In Yiddish, real ton is a very difficult word. It means like to touch into something. He said that causes an arousal in the father that is purely mitzad iskasher shalahem b'pchinas ha'atzma shalahem mamish. That's not because of any reason. It's not because of any isboninus or any gilui. No, that's because they're mamish one and the same essence. And therefore, they re-establish their iskashers. It's not that they form a new iskashers. But they just re-establish iskashers that is anyway there. On that basis, we see that there's a form of Ava which it doesn't know of any limitations. When it's touched off, it just comes and arouses the deepest and most essential part of a human being, of a person. You can't talk any deeper than that in him. That's the deepest point he had. And therefore, says the Rebbe, and therefore he touches, now we'll take it in the mashal, in the nimshal rather. We'll take from this long mashal to how it is with Yidden and the Eibishter. Well, we have it written in last week's parasha that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Pare that in the name of Hashem that B'ni B'choirei Yisrael, that the Yidden are my firstborn son. And then later in Pasha Riyeh over there in Dvarim, it's written Boni Matem L'Hashem Elekecha. Over here at the beginning of Yetzias Mitzrayim, when Moshe begins the Shlichus, the Pare, then he uses the expression Bani B'choli Yisrael. So, we're now going to see how all this applies in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we have to think carefully here for a moment, what have we described here? And even though we call it Ahava, normally Ahava is what's called a midah b'leiv. It's like a feeling in the heart, which is one of the 7 midos. It's one of the 7 emotional traits of the heart. Would you say that this type of thing that we're picturing here is an emotional trait? I mean, it's very hard to say that, because it's not. In the first case we brought down, then we can't call it. It's based on a certain reasoning. It's based on appreciation, certain facts, factors, causes an arousal of the heart. Over here were 2 essences to join up, and they touch one another, which are the very essence of their being. Then you can't really say that's ahava. It's not a midah, because a midah is only one of the 10 revealed powers of the soul. And this is kind of something much, much more profound. So there we have to say that the inyan for ahava and the whole concept of the word ahava has in itself different levels. And there are certain inyanim, certain forms of drawing towards another being or another entity, which are called ahava, but they're not really ahava in the normal sense, but they're what you might call a pnimius bi'atzmiyus, which is connected with ahava. And it has certain traits of ahava, and to a certain extent it's what you might call the pnimius of other ahavas. And therefore we find that the word ahava is based on a word in Lashon Kodesh, ovo. And the hey is just like making it into a noun, ahavo. That's the noun from the word ovo. And therefore we find a very famous pasuk in Pasha Kiseitze, in Devarim, where it's written that Moshe Rabbeinu says that Bilam tried to chapter with the Yidden. And it's written, V'loi ovo Hashem alakecha lishmoya el Bilam. The Jews didn't want, literally, ovo, aleph, vase, hey. The Jews didn't want to listen to Bilam. So that's explained, that's a very, very profound gesher between the Eibishter and the Yidden, which we're going to see here right now. Why didn't he want to listen even to Bilam? Because the Yidden are his kinder, the Yidden are his sons. And here's this grimy Russia from the Umas Ha'olam is trying to say all these terrible things about his son, and some of them, Rachmanin Islam, were based on facts, because there was a whole business with the Bnei Moav, and they ran after the Moavite daughters with the whole thing. So I mean, it wasn't so good. The matter, Begolu. And after Pekain, it's written, V'loi ovo Hashem alakecha lishmoya el Bilam. He didn't want to listen to Bilam. And it's brought down that's got to do with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, with a whole big arichas. Well, it's not it's kedai, but it's not possible. It's not time permitting to go into it all here at this particular point. However, suffice it to say that the word ovo means will. The word ovo means he didn't want to listen to God. And therefore the word ahava is based on the word to will. How do you call it? To want something, be emes, without the power of will. And therefore all the midas, to a certain extent, have a certain trace of will in them. But they're a form of will which comes into a more revealed aspect of the soul. But that's also another quite a lengthy inyan, which is not so important here. What is important here is that this connection between the father and the son, even though we call it ahavo, that's a form of a descriptive term that we use, because there are certain things in which are similar to ordinary love. They're devoted, they're tremendously connected one to the other, etc., etc. But we don't really mean here ordinary love in the normal sense. No, what we mean, ha'inyan shel Rotzani, we mean a iskashus atzmi, which can only be described as a pnimius, a rotzen pnimi. And rotzen being as it is a koyach atzmi and a koyach makiv, it comes mitzad the eter, as well known. As we had earlier in the Hampshire, the digging for rotzen is hatoyas ha'eter. We had that earlier in the mind. Erefa, that's what the Rebbe means here. Why is it that this ahava is so unusual, and once it's touched off, it doesn't need any hisboninus in it, because things that you really want, mitzad your etzim, you don't need any hisboninus. There's certain things that people really want, yeah, which have to do almost with them being what they are. There's all sorts of different retainers that people have. So some types of wills have a little bit to do with his boniness. You get to hear about a certain thing. If you hadn't heard about it, you wouldn't want it. Or once you want it, then you're not any interested anymore in what explain to you why you want it. All you know is that you want that, and you're prepared to sort of go for it at all costs. That's it's like a ahava, but it's not. It's a ahava pnimis v'atzmiyas, and we call it ahava because it's got certain similarities to the midah shebenefesh, which is called ahava. Kein yesh lema, that's the beer. And if this whole thing functions in ways that they don't make sense according to normal arousal and expressions of midas, of emotions, but this is a etzem to a etzem in a way that knows there's no limitation to it. There's nothing can blot it out. There's nothing can cause it to become weakened. Because therefore we see that sometimes a father can have a lot of chorus from a certain son, but when he sits down and thinks for a moment, this is his son, he forgets all the chorus. Like he says, Macy my boy. All he has to do is say, oh, wait a minute, this is my son. And after that, everything just falls away. It follows, if he said that we're talking about a initial ratzon. It's only called ahava. And in ratzon itself, it's a very powerful ratzon. Because there are also certain ratzonos that are touched off at least by seichel. And then they become very powerful because basically they're ratzon. But then there's certain ratzonos that you never really thought about that ratzon. And it's just there in you, mitzad the very facts of existence. That's one of these ratzonos, but that is the yearning or the devotion of the ben to the av and the av to the av to the ben. As Amir said, that's what we talk about when we say Yidden are the children of the Eibishter. We mean that this love of a Yid for the Eibishter is a ongoing, completely immediate, unblockable thing. Yeah, what he has in him, and all he's got to do is remember it. He's just going to be Mason Liboy, and it'll come out. And if I said, what all these hours we talk about, in Tanya where you must boin in this in, you have to be misboin in bariches, and if you want, you don't have the hour. That's another type of inyan altogether. That's taka hour. I said, but if I can have this hour, what do I need all those for? That's a good question, isn't it? So the answer is that the Eibusha wants you to have your own hour as well. He wants that we should reach hours with our own effort. This is not our own effort. And there's a certain perfection in the whole Aveda of a mensch when he did it himself. So when he reached love and devotion to the Eibusha, without his own koichos, that's got a certain desirability by the Eibusha. The Eibusha wants that. This is not desirability. This is the etzem connection of Yidden with Telakus.
So does that mean that the love which is timidius is like that with the father and the son, but then the love which is as in Tanya, like we're supposed to
well, not all of it, because he talks about this love in Tanya also a lot. He talks about the albums. The truth is, he talks about the albums probably more than he does the other types of albums. But in Perik Mem Gimel and Mem Dalet, if you look up carefully, you'll see that he describes all the different types of ava, what they come inside his bonus. And he demands them. He says, you've got to have them.
But still, is that the type of love, like someone who loves another person because of their greatness and who they? And
In a way, yeah. In a way, yeah. In other words, there's a hisbonenus there. In other words, there's a sibur to that ava. You're right.
That's a lower type of ava?
Yeah, in a way it is, but it's got a mila, you'll see over there in Tanya, that you did it yourself. And something that you did yourself is by the Eibishter very dear. That he wants that just as much as he wants this type of ava. Because that's a certain perfection of the connection between you and him, in the sense that it came from you. Alright, so he said that that's an akuda now of Bani B'ni B'choyli Yisrael. Nu are we Kamoi Kein Yuvan Bishkashus Amiti the Neshamas Yisrael Belakus Shanema Boni Matem Lashem Eloi. You are children to the Eibishter Uksi B'ni B'choyli Yisrael, that the Eibishter says through Moshe Rabbeinu to Parai that the Yidden are my firstborn, they're my my B'cher. Shahein b'chinas iskashus atzmiyus le'elakus sheyesh k'moy teva atzmi b'nefesh elakis lidobik b'mkoyer chutzva she'ein shum tam v'sibah el ha'ava v'iskashus azoi. In other words, he said this is like a teva in the nefesh elakis lidobik, to cleave to the source of their derivation. Chutzvah is from example, you say lachtzov, if you've got a big mine, you only cut rocks out of a mine, you chop them out, that's called lachtzov. So everything just gets chopped off in the same rocks. So, in other words, it's all, how do they call it, a chip off the old block, to use the expression. And that was a Rebbe Makoyer Choitzvah, where the neshama is literally chopped off from. In other words, she comes from the very essence.
What's the taich?
Huh?
What's the taich of Choitzvah?
Choitzvah, the place from where she is literally chopped off. No, that's what it means. The word choitza means to chop.
Is there a taich for the word Choitzvah?
Yeah, it means her essential source. She'ein shum tam v'sibah el ha'ava. There's no time or sibur to that ava. Ve'ais kashus hazois. And this interwovingness. Ki'im mitzat shahin ke'etzom echad. The Imam is just like one etzem. Ve'ais kashus hazois. He intermediates, just like we saw in the whole description of the sun. Therefore he said this is an ongoing iskashu is v'rach tzrichim le'oiroro lefiomim. It only needs to be aroused, but not always. Sometimes the Yid feels it even without having to arouse it. He just has to remind himself. Nizko. He reminds himself. Yeah, just like we saw in the in the human sphere, he just remembers that Eich Sha'ato Ovinu. He remembers that he's a Yid, and that the Eibishter is his father. Yeah. He says, Ato of Avinu. Pili place. Oy Shabo Legiloi Alidei Arichos. Just exactly what we saw in the marshal. Just the very fact that he's distant, that itself can sometimes cause him to chap what is going on. And that's an amazing thing. Sometimes Dafka when a Yid gets himself into all sorts of things which take him away from Torah and away from his revealed connection with the Eibishter, that itself all of a sudden makes him realize that he's a Yid. And therefore it's an amazing thing. You've got nowadays all these Beit Chabads, all over the world, in all sorts of places, like in Nepal and in the Himalayas, and all these amazing places where from Eretz Yisrael, they wander around there in the hundreds of thousands, even these places. South America and all over those weird sort of places. They creep all over the place. All of a sudden they walk into a Beit Chabad and they say, oh, so they want to think about the Yiddishkeit and the Chois Mitzvot. So, hey, Shalom Aleichem, what's Ma Yom Yomayim, what is today different than any other day? Because the very richuk itself, the very fact that they're so far, you're both in ruchnias, and they find themselves in a very distant place from the Americas of the whole world, which is Eretz Yisrael. All of a sudden, boom, something. You just say a word to them, and they'll become enthused and all this type of thing. Therefore, said the Rebbe, it sometimes happens through the inif and richuk. That's what we say on Rosh Hashanah, min ha-meitzer koroti. Oh, what's written over there? Anoni b'merchavko. That the Eiv's will answer. The Eiv's answers back. That's all because of Ato Ovino. So we'll see about that more in the coming and developing episodes. This whole inyan of Ato Ovino Davki, it's at the Rotzen, Atzmi. This is a rotzen. David has for Yidden. It's a rotzen. Like Ovo Hashem Rakei didn't even want to listen. He didn't even pay any attention to this whole bill and business. Well, we have to come with a taina. It's Kof Zion, Tevet, Toshim, Samech Zion. Thousands of years with the Yidden Adrens Charum, with this richuk, and all this. And so we have to say, Ato Avinu, if you're a father. Then what's with the kinderlach? Let's do something about your kinderlach. If not, huh? So we have to say that Eibishter's near, finish off all this richuk business. So call us, those mishugas, everything on. So let's get back. And that's what the Rebbe says in all the seers. The children want to go back to their father's table. They want to eat on their father's table, not in the United States or America, however good it shouldn't be over there. Yeah, or whatever. Or for that matter, from the nice polished Australian suburban streets. So it's all very nice. And Ato Avinu. I say, hey, Ato Avinu. It's another minus. Isn't it? It's another request. So, Amen, can you hear?
Amen.
We've begun in March.
Amen.
And the other night we were so close. For some very unappreciable reason, we just didn't make it over the wall at that particular moment. But take it from here. We will. Praise Hashem. Good. Okay, guys. Have a good evening.